When three seniors cornered 28-year-old Emma Walsh in the empty hallway after last period, mocking her disability and threatening to, quote, teach her a lesson about respect, they thought they were targeting just another weak substitute teacher who walked with a cane. What they didn't know was that Emma had spent 15 years mastering Krav Maga and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, earning her black belt through years of adaptive martial arts training that had transformed her perceived weakness into her greatest strength. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The security cameras captured everything as their cruel laughter turned to shocked silence in less than 30 seconds. But the real story began 3 months earlier, when Emma first walked through the doors of Riverside High School with a carefully hidden agenda that had nothing to do with teaching algebra. The morning fog clung to the suburban streets of Millbrook as Emma Walsh carefully maneuvered her silver Honda Civic into the faculty parking lot of Riverside High School. Her walking cane rested against the passenger seat, its polished wood surface bearing the subtle scratches that told the story of 3 years of daily use since the accident that had changed everything about her life. To any casual observer, Emma appeared to be exactly what her employment file indicated: a young mathematics teacher recovering from a serious car accident, grateful for the opportunity to continue her career despite her newfound mobility challenges. The truth was far more complex than anyone at Riverside High School could have imagined. Emma's decision to accept the position at this particular school wasn't driven by desperation or limited options, but by a carefully researched choice that had taken her months to orchestrate. Her younger brother Jake had been a student at Riverside High School 2 years earlier, and his experience there had ended in tragedy that the administration had worked tirelessly to cover up and forget. Jake Walsh had been a quiet, artistic teenager who excelled in creative writing and digital media, but struggled with the aggressive social dynamics that dominated Riverside's hallways. He had endured months of systematic bullying from a group of athletes who viewed his gentle nature and creative interests as signs of weakness that needed to be corrected through humiliation and violence. The harassment had escalated steadily throughout his junior year, progressing from verbal taunts to physical confrontations that left him increasingly isolated and afraid to attend school. The final incident had occurred in the gymnasium after a school assembly, when Jake had been cornered by 5 members of the wrestling team who decided to demonstrate their dominance by forcing him to perform degrading acts while they recorded everything on their phones. The video had been shared throughout the school's social media networks within hours, destroying Jake's reputation and making his continued attendance at Riverside impossible. Despite Emma's efforts to seek justice through official channels, the school's administration had dismissed the incident as boys being boys, and suggested that Jake might be happier at a different educational institution. 3 weeks after transferring to a new school, Jake had taken his own life, leaving behind a detailed journal that documented every instance of harassment he had endured at Riverside High School. Emma had discovered the journal while helping her parents clean out Jake's room, and reading his meticulous documentation of systematic abuse had filled her with a rage that burned hotter than her grief. Her brother's words painted a picture of institutional indifference that enabled predatory behavior while silencing victims who didn't have the social status or family connections to fight back effectively. Emma's background made her uniquely qualified to understand both the legal and practical challenges of seeking justice for Jake's treatment. Before the car accident that had left her dependent on a walking cane, she had been pursuing a career in social work while training intensively in martial arts, as both a personal passion and a form of therapy for childhood trauma. Her father had introduced her to Krav Maga when she was 13, believing that every young woman should learn to defend herself, but Emma had discovered that martial arts offered her something deeper than just physical protection. The discipline and mental focus required for advanced martial arts training had helped Emma channel her natural intensity into productive outlets, while developing confidence and physical capability that transformed her from an anxious teenager into a formidable young woman. By the time she started college, Emma was competing at regional levels in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments, while maintaining a perfect academic record in her social work program. Her instructors often commented on her unique combination of analytical intelligence and physical courage, predicting a successful career helping vulnerable populations navigate complex institutional systems. The car accident that changed Emma's life had occurred on a rainy November evening during her final semester of graduate school. A drunk driver had run a red light while Emma was returning from her evening martial arts class, and the collision had left her with severe injuries to her left leg and hip that required multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation. The doctors had initially warned that she might never walk normally again, But Emma's martial arts background had given her the mental discipline and pain tolerance necessary to exceed every medical prediction about her recovery. The physical rehabilitation process had been grueling, requiring Emma to completely reconstruct her approach to movement and balance while learning to integrate a walking cane into her daily activities. But rather than viewing her new mobility aid as a limitation, Emma had worked with adaptive martial arts instructors to develop techniques that incorporated her cane as both a support device and a potential defensive weapon. Her rehabilitation became a form of advanced training that taught her to adapt traditional martial arts techniques to her new physical reality. During the darkest months of her recovery, when chronic pain and mobility challenges made her question whether she would ever feel strong again, Emma had discovered that her cane could be transformed into an extension of her martial arts training rather than simply a medical necessity. Working with instructors who specialized in adaptive combat techniques, she learned to use her apparent vulnerability as a strategic advantage, while developing fighting techniques that were specifically designed for someone who appeared to be physically compromised. The process of learning to fight effectively while using a mobility aid had required Emma to develop entirely new approaches to balance, leverage, and tactical thinking. Traditional martial arts techniques had to be modified to account for her changed center of gravity and the need to maintain 3 points of contact with the ground, but these adaptations had ultimately made her more creative and unpredictable as a fighter. Opponents who assumed her cane represented weakness consistently underestimated her capability until it was too late to adjust their strategy. By the time Emma received her black belt in adaptive Krav Maga, 18 months after the accident, she had developed a fighting style that was uniquely suited to her circumstances, while remaining devastatingly effective against opponents who made assumptions based on her appearance. Her instructors often used her as an example when teaching other students about the importance of adaptability and the danger of underestimating opponents based on perceived physical limitations. Emma's decision to pursue a teaching career rather than continuing with social work had been directly influenced by Jake's death and her growing understanding of how educational institutions could either protect vulnerable students or enable their abuse. She believed that meaningful change required people who understood both the system's failures and the practical skills necessary to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Her brother's journal had revealed that teachers and administrators at Riverside High School had witnessed his harassment, but chosen to ignore it rather than confront the social dynamics that made bullying profitable for popular students. The position at Riverside High School had become available suddenly when the previous mathematics teacher had resigned mid-semester, citing stress and burnout that Emma suspected was related to the same toxic culture that had destroyed her brother. The administration had been desperate to find a qualified replacement who could maintain classroom order while improving the department's test scores, and Emma's impressive academic credentials combined with her apparent vulnerability had made her seem like an ideal candidate for a position that more experienced teachers had declined. Principal Robert Hansen had conducted Emma's interview with the kind of patronizing concern that suggested he viewed her primarily as an inspiration rather than a serious educator. His questions had focused more on her recovery from the accident and her strategies for managing classroom discipline, despite her physical limitations, than on her mathematical expertise or pedagogical philosophy. Emma had recognized the interview dynamic immediately, understanding that Hansen saw her as someone who would be grateful for any opportunity and unlikely to challenge existing institutional practices. The teaching position came with a small apartment above the school's maintenance facility, a housing arrangement that the administration presented as a convenience, but Emma recognized as a form of isolation that would make her more dependent on the school's support, while limiting her ability to develop relationships outside the institutional environment. Previous teachers who had lived in the school-provided housing had found themselves increasingly embedded in the school's social dynamics, while losing the external perspective necessary to recognize and challenge problematic institutional practices. Emma had accepted both the position and the housing arrangement with enthusiasm that masked her true motivations. Living on campus would give her unprecedented access to observe the school's culture during evening and weekend hours, when administrative oversight was minimal, and students felt free to express their authentic attitudes and behaviors. Her apparent vulnerability would make her a natural target for the same students who had tormented Jake, providing opportunities to document their behavior while gathering evidence of institutional failures. The apartment itself was spartanly furnished, but perfectly suited to Emma's needs, with reinforced floors that could support the kind of training equipment she would need to maintain her martial arts conditioning while conducting her investigation. The building's isolation from faculty housing meant that her evening training sessions would go unnoticed, allowing her to maintain the physical capabilities that her strategy would ultimately require while appearing to struggle with basic mobility during school hours. Emma's first week at Riverside High School was spent carefully establishing her cover while observing the social dynamics that Jake's journal had described in painful detail.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She presented herself as a dedicated but somewhat overwhelmed new teacher who was grateful for any help or guidance from more experienced colleagues. Her walking cane and slight limp generated the kind of sympathetic attention that made people want to assist her, while simultaneously viewing her as less capable than her credentials suggested. The mathematics department consisted of 4 teachers who had developed a defensive camaraderie based on their shared frustration with administrative indifference and student apathy. Department head Margaret Foster was a 20-year veteran who had learned to survive by avoiding confrontation with problem students while focusing exclusively on the minority of pupils who demonstrated genuine academic interest. Her colleagues had adopted similar strategies of selective engagement that allowed them to maintain professional dignity while acknowledging their inability to address broader institutional problems. Emma's integration into the department was smoothed by her colleagues' assumptions about her limitations and motivations. They viewed her as someone who would naturally focus on basic classroom management, rather than challenging the social dynamics that made their jobs difficult, and they offered advice that consistently emphasized accommodation and conflict avoidance over confrontation or institutional change. Their guidance revealed a deep understanding of how the school's power structures protected certain students, while making teachers vulnerable to retaliation for challenging popular or athletic pupils. The student body at Riverside High School reflected the economic and social divisions of Millbrook's suburban community, where working-class families lived alongside middle management professionals who had chosen the district for its reputation for college preparation and athletic achievement. The school's culture was dominated by students whose families had invested heavily in sports programs and college preparatory activities, creating an environment where social status was determined by athletic ability, family income, and willingness to conform to established hierarchies. Emma's first encounters with students revealed immediately why Jake had struggled to find his place in Riverside's social ecosystem. The hallways were dominated by groups of athletes who moved through the building with the confidence of young people who knew that their success was valued more highly than the comfort or safety of their less prominent classmates. These students spoke loudly about parties, athletic achievements, and social conflicts, while making it clear that they considered themselves exempt from the behavioral expectations that governed other pupils. The administration's tolerance for this behavior was evident in every interaction Emma observed between faculty and students. Teachers consistently avoided confronting popular students about dress code violations, disruptive behavior, or academic dishonesty, while enforcing rules strictly against pupils who lacked social protection. The message was clear to everyone in the building. Some students were more valuable than others, and challenging the valuable ones was a career-limiting decision for faculty members who wanted to maintain their positions. Emma's apparent vulnerability made her an immediate target for testing by students who wanted to establish the boundaries of what they could accomplish with the new teacher. Her first period algebra class included several members of the wrestling team who had been involved in Jake's harassment, and their behavior during her initial lessons revealed that they viewed her as someone who could be intimidated into accepting their disruptive behavior without consequences. The ringleader of this group was Kyle Martinez, a senior wrestler whose family owned several local businesses and had donated significant money to the school's athletic programs. Kyle had been one of the students directly involved in the incident that had led to Jake's transfer, and his behavior toward Emma suggested that he viewed her as another opportunity to demonstrate his ability to dominate vulnerable faculty members without facing meaningful consequences. Kyle's approach to testing Emma's boundaries was sophisticated and calculated, designed to establish dominance while maintaining plausible deniability if she complained to administrators. He would arrive late to class with elaborate excuses that were clearly fabricated but delivered with the confidence of someone who knew that his explanations would be accepted, regardless of their credibility. During lessons, he would ask questions that were designed to waste time and demonstrate his ability to control the classroom's pace and direction. The most troubling aspect of Kyle's behavior was his treatment of Emma's mobility aid, which he viewed as both a symbol of weakness and an opportunity for humiliation. He would position himself so that Emma had to navigate around him to reach different parts of the classroom, creating situations where her cane might bump into his desk or backpack. These incidents were always presented as accidents, but the pattern revealed a deliberate strategy of using her mobility challenges as a source of entertainment for his friends. Emma recognized Kyle's tactics immediately because Jake's journal had described identical behavior from the same group of students. The consistency of their approach revealed that this was an established pattern rather than spontaneous teenage misbehavior, and Emma understood that Kyle was testing her responses to determine whether she would become another victim of their systematic harassment or find some way to establish boundaries that they would respect. Her response to Kyle's initial provocations was carefully calibrated to encourage escalation while documenting every incident for the evidence she was systematically collecting. Emma presented herself as someone who was trying to maintain authority despite obvious discomfort with confrontation, creating the impression that she could be gradually worn down through persistent pressure. Her apparent frustration with Kyle's behavior made other students increasingly bold in their own testing of her boundaries. The wrestling team's campaign against Emma escalated predictably as they realized that she seemed unable or unwilling to establish effective consequences for their disruptive behavior. Team members began arriving late in groups, creating disruptions that consumed significant class time, while demonstrating their collective ability to undermine her lessons. They would stage elaborate conversations about weekend parties and athletic achievements that were clearly designed to shift attention away from mathematical concepts toward topics that emphasized their social dominance. Emma's documentation of these incidents was meticulous and comprehensive, recorded through discrete devices that captured both audio and video evidence of behavior that administrators would later claim they had never witnessed or been told about. Her apparent struggles with classroom management provided perfect cover for the systematic evidence collection that would eventually expose the institutional failures that had enabled Jake's harassment and ultimate death. The most significant revelation during Emma's first month at Riverside High School was the discovery that Kyle and his friends had preserved the video of Jake's humiliation as a trophy of their dominance. During a conversation that Emma overheard in the hallway, Kyle had bragged to underclassmen about his collection of videos documenting various harassment incidents, describing them as insurance against future challenges to his authority. The casual way he discussed these recordings revealed that he viewed documentation of other students' humiliation as a form of power that enhanced his social status. Emma realized that Kyle's video collection represented crucial evidence that could finally provide justice for Jake, while exposing the broader pattern of harassment that continued to thrive at Riverside High School. However, obtaining access to these recordings would require her to provoke Kyle into a confrontation where he felt confident enough to reference or display his trophies, and such a confrontation would inevitably involve personal risk that her martial arts training had prepared her to handle. The challenge Emma faced was engineering a situation where Kyle would reveal his true nature in a way that could be documented and used as evidence, while ensuring that any physical confrontation occurred in a location where her response could be justified as self-defense. Her brother's death had taught her that institutional justice was impossible without overwhelming evidence that administrators couldn't dismiss or cover up, and Kyle's arrogance would ultimately provide the opportunity she needed to gather that evidence. As October progressed, Emma's interactions with Kyle and his wrestling team friends became increasingly tense, with both sides understanding that their conflict was building toward a confrontation that would determine whether she could establish authority in her classroom or would become another faculty casualty of Riverside's toxic culture. Emma's apparent vulnerability encouraged Kyle to become more aggressive, while her martial arts training ensured that she was prepared for whatever escalation he might attempt. The other students in Emma's classes watched these developing tensions with the fascination of people observing a social experiment whose outcome would affect their own future interactions with authority figures. Some students began testing their own boundaries with Emma, curious to see whether her apparent weakness extended to other areas of classroom management, while others seemed uncomfortable with Kyle's increasingly aggressive behavior but unwilling to challenge someone whose social status protected him from consequences. Emma's colleagues in the mathematics department offered advice that consistently emphasized accommodation and avoidance rather than confrontation, revealing their own experiences with students who had successfully intimidated previous teachers into accepting disruptive behavior. Their suggestions reflected years of institutional conditioning that had taught them to view certain students as untouchable, while expecting faculty members to absorb harassment as part of their professional responsibilities. Principal Hansen's response to Emma's discreet inquiries about classroom management strategies revealed his prioritization of avoiding conflict over protecting faculty members from student harassment. His guidance consistently emphasized the importance of understanding student backgrounds and family circumstances, while suggesting that challenging certain pupils could damage the school's relationships with influential community members. The message was clear. Emma was expected to adapt to existing power dynamics rather than challenge behaviors that would be unacceptable in any other professional environment. The wrestling team's confidence in their immunity from consequences was reinforced by their coach, Mike Stevens, who had built his career on protecting his athletes from accountability while demanding that other faculty members accommodate their behavior regardless of its impact on the educational environment. Stevens had cultivated relationships with administrators and influential parents that allowed him to frame any criticism of his athletes as attacks on the school's athletic program and community reputation. Emma's research into Stevens' background revealed a pattern of schools where he had coached, each transition coinciding with scandals involving athlete behavior that had been covered up rather than addressed. His current position at Riverside High School represented the culmination of a career built on enabling student-athletes to view themselves as exempt from the behavioral expectations that governed other pupils, and his protection of Kyle's group was part of a broader institutional culture that prioritized athletic success over student safety. The approaching climax of Emma's first semester at Riverside High School would test whether her months of careful preparation and systematic evidence collection had created the foundation for finally achieving justice for Jake, while protecting future students from the harassment culture that had thrived unchallenged for years. Kyle's increasing aggression suggested that he was preparing for a dramatic demonstration of his power over faculty members, and Emma's martial arts training ensured that she would be ready when that moment arrived. The security cameras that would capture Kyle's ultimate humiliation were already in place, and Emma's documentation of institutional failures had created a comprehensive record that no amount of administrative damage control could dismiss or explain away. The final confrontation was approaching, and both Emma and Kyle understood that their conflict would determine whether Riverside High School's culture of impunity would continue or finally face the accountability that Jake's death had demanded. The November rain hammered against the classroom windows as Emma watched Kyle Martinez swagger through her second-period algebra class, deliberately bumping into her desk with his shoulder as he passed. The impact sent her carefully arranged lesson materials sliding across the surface, some falling to the floor in a scattered mess that would require her to bend awkwardly to retrieve them. Kyle's smirk told her everything she needed to know about the intentional nature of his clumsiness, and the snickers from his wrestling teammates confirmed that this was a coordinated performance designed to establish his dominance over her physical space. Emma's response was measured and professional, despite the anger that burned in her chest as she recognized the exact same tactics that Jake had described in his journal. She slowly gathered the fallen papers while maintaining eye contact with Kyle, her expression neutral but her mind cataloging every detail of the incident for the comprehensive documentation she was building. The discreet recording devices sewn into her cardigan captured not only Kyle's deliberate aggression, but also the reactions of other students who were learning through observation that their new mathematics teacher could be physically intimidated without consequences. The escalation had been building steadily since Halloween, when Kyle and his friends had discovered that Emma's attempts to establish classroom discipline were ineffective against students who understood their protected status within Riverside High School's social hierarchy. What had begun as testing behavior had evolved into systematic harassment that was becoming bolder and more personal with each passing day. Emma's apparent vulnerability had encouraged Kyle to push boundaries that most students wouldn't dare cross with faculty members, and his success was inspiring other troubled students to attempt their own challenges to her authority. The mathematics department's response to Emma's discreet requests for guidance had revealed the depth of institutional dysfunction that enabled student harassment of faculty members. Department head Margaret Foster had advised Emma to focus on building positive relationships with problem students rather than confronting their behavior directly, suggesting that Kyle's aggression stemmed from academic frustration that could be addressed through additional support and understanding. Her advice reflected years of conditioning that had taught faculty members to absorb student hostility rather than challenge behaviors that would be unacceptable in any other professional environment. Foster's guidance had been echoed by Emma's other colleagues, who consistently emphasized accommodation over confrontation when dealing with students whose families wielded influence within the community. Their suggestions revealed a shared understanding that certain pupils were effectively untouchable, and that faculty members who challenged these students too aggressively would find themselves isolated and eventually forced out of their positions. The mathematics department had learned to survive by accepting limitations on their authority, while focusing their energy on students who demonstrated respect for educational boundaries. Emma's documentation of these conversations provided crucial evidence of institutional failure that extended far beyond individual student behavior problems. The systematic advice she received from experienced colleagues revealed a culture where faculty members were expected to tolerate harassment, while administrators maintained plausible deniability about conditions that made effective teaching impossible. Her recording devices captured not only the content of these discussions but also the resignation and frustration in her colleagues' voices as they described their own experiences with protected students. Kyle's behavior toward Emma had become increasingly physical as he tested the boundaries of what he could accomplish without triggering meaningful consequences. His pattern of deliberately invading her personal space during classroom discussions had evolved into more aggressive contact that appeared accidental but felt unmistakably predatory. He would position himself so that Emma had to choose between abandoning her intended path through the classroom or accepting physical contact that made her uncomfortable while demonstrating his power over her movement and positioning. The most troubling aspect of Kyle's escalating behavior was his focus on Emma's walking cane, which he had identified as both a symbol of her vulnerability and an opportunity for humiliation that would entertain his friends while establishing his dominance. He had developed a repertoire of seemingly accidental interactions with her mobility aid that ranged from stepping on the cane's tip when she set it down to positioning his backpack where she might trip over it while navigating around student desks. These incidents were always accompanied by elaborate apologies that mocked genuine concern while making it clear that Kyle viewed her disability as a source of entertainment. Emma's martial arts training had taught her to recognize Kyle's tactics as classic predatory behavior designed to test her responses while establishing patterns that could be escalated gradually without triggering defensive reactions. His approach was sophisticated and calculated, suggesting experience with intimidating, vulnerable targets while maintaining plausible deniability that would protect him if his behavior was challenged by authority figures. The consistency of his strategy revealed that Kyle was following a playbook rather than acting on spontaneous impulses. The wrestling team's participation in Kyle's harassment campaign had created a classroom environment where Emma felt constantly monitored and evaluated by students who were looking for signs of weakness that could be exploited for their entertainment. Team members had adopted supporting roles that amplified Kyle's primary attacks, while creating the impression of widespread student dissatisfaction with Emma's teaching methods. Their coordination suggested regular planning sessions where they discussed strategies for maximizing their psychological impact while minimizing their risk of consequences. Emma's hidden recording equipment captured conversations between wrestling team members that revealed the extent of their planning and the explicit nature of their goals. During a discussion that occurred while students worked on practice problems, she overheard Jake Stevens and Marcus Thompson debating whether Emma would quit before Christmas break or persist through the spring semester despite their campaign against her. Their casual discussion of driving her away revealed that they viewed faculty harassment as an entertaining challenge rather than inappropriate behavior that violated professional boundaries. The content of these conversations provided Emma with crucial evidence about the systematic nature of the harassment, while revealing specific threats and goals that could be used to demonstrate premeditation if legal action became necessary. The students' assumption that their discussions were private had led them to speak openly about strategies that would constitute clear evidence of conspiracy if properly documented and presented to appropriate authorities. Emma's discreet recording capabilities ensured that every word was preserved in high-quality audio that could be analyzed and verified by forensic experts. Kyle's escalating confidence had led him to begin making increasingly personal comments about Emma's disability and appearance that crossed clear professional boundaries, while maintaining the pretense of casual conversation. His remarks about her walking cane had evolved from seemingly innocent questions about her mobility needs to pointed observations about how her disability affected her ability to manage classroom discipline effectively. These comments were delivered in tones that suggested concern, while making their mocking intent unmistakable to anyone who understood the dynamics of harassment. The most significant development during Emma's second month at Riverside High School was Kyle's decision to recruit additional students from outside the wrestling team to participate in his campaign against her authority. His influence within the school's social hierarchy had attracted followers who saw association with his harassment campaign as an opportunity to improve their own status while participating in behavior that was both exciting and consequence-free. This expansion had created a classroom environment where Emma faced hostility from multiple sources, while wrestling team members served as coordinators and instigators. Emma's observation of these recruitment efforts provided valuable intelligence about how harassment cultures spread within educational institutions and how individual perpetrators leverage social dynamics to multiply their impact on targeted victims. Kyle's ability to attract followers revealed the appeal of participating in sanctioned aggression against vulnerable authority figures, and Emma understood that this pattern had likely contributed to Jake's isolation and ultimate despair during his time at Riverside High School. The administration's response to Emma's carefully worded concerns about classroom management challenges had confirmed her worst suspicions about institutional priorities and faculty protection policies. Principal Hansen's guidance consistently emphasized the importance of understanding student perspectives and building positive relationships rather than addressing specific behavioral problems that were making her job increasingly difficult. His advice revealed a fundamental unwillingness to acknowledge that certain students were systematically undermining educational environments while targeting faculty members for harassment. Assistant Principal Laura Martinez had been even more explicit about the school's expectations regarding faculty tolerance for student aggression. During a private meeting that Emma had requested to discuss classroom discipline strategies, Martinez had suggested that Emma's military bearing and high academic expectations might be intimidating to students who were accustomed to more relaxed educational environments. Her recommendation that Emma adopt a more accommodating teaching style essentially placed responsibility for student harassment on Emma's shoulders, while implying that her professional standards were unrealistic for Riverside High School's culture. Emma's documentation of these administrative responses provided crucial evidence of institutional failure that extended beyond individual negligence to systematic policies that enabled student harassment while protecting perpetrators from consequences. The consistent pattern of advice she received from school leadership revealed a culture where faculty members were expected to absorb hostility while administrators maintained distance from conflicts that might require them to challenge influential students or their families. The most revealing aspect of Emma's interactions with school administrators was their obvious discomfort with her systematic approach to documenting incidents and requesting specific interventions. Her careful record-keeping and detailed incident reports seemed to alarm officials who were accustomed to dealing with faculty complaints through informal discussions that left no paper trail. Their suggestions that she handle problems through relationship building rather than formal documentation revealed their preference for maintaining plausible deniability about harassment that they knew was occurring but chose not to address directly. Kyle's growing confidence in his immunity from consequences had led him to begin testing physical boundaries that brought his behavior closer to outright assault, while maintaining the appearance of accidental contact. His strategy of bumping into Emma's desk had evolved into more direct physical intimidation that included blocking her path through the classroom and positioning himself so that she had to request him to move rather than simply navigating around his presence. These escalations were designed to force Emma into increasingly submissive positions while demonstrating his power over her professional environment. The psychological impact of Kyle's systematic harassment was carefully calculated to create stress and anxiety that would undermine Emma's confidence while making her appear increasingly unstable to other students and faculty members. His tactics included interrupting her lessons with irrelevant questions that disrupted her teaching rhythm, creating distractions that made it difficult for other students to focus on mathematical concepts, and fostering an atmosphere where her authority was constantly questioned and undermined through subtle challenges that accumulated over time. Emma's martial arts training had taught her to recognize these tactics as classic psychological warfare designed to break down an opponent's mental defenses before launching physical attacks. Kyle's approach revealed sophisticated understanding of how to create vulnerability in targets while building toward confrontations where he would hold significant tactical advantages. His strategy was working exactly as intended, creating conditions where Emma appeared increasingly isolated and ineffective, while Kyle demonstrated his power over faculty authority to an audience of impressionable students. The most dangerous aspect of Kyle's escalating behavior was his increasing focus on Emma's walking cane as a target for humiliation that would provide maximum entertainment value while highlighting her physical vulnerability. His interactions with her mobility aid had become increasingly aggressive, progressing from accidentally bumping into it to deliberately stepping on its tip when she placed it against her desk. These incidents were accompanied by elaborate apologies that mocked genuine remorse while making his intentions clear to everyone who witnessed them. Emma understood that Kyle's fixation on her disability represented a dangerous escalation that was building toward a confrontation designed to maximize her humiliation while demonstrating his power over her most basic physical needs. His behavior suggested planning for a dramatic incident that would either force her resignation or establish his complete dominance over her presence in the school environment. The systematic nature of his approach revealed experience with targeting vulnerable individuals while maintaining protection from institutional consequences. The wrestling team's coordination in supporting Kyle's harassment campaign had created a classroom environment where Emma faced constant surveillance and evaluation from students who were actively working to undermine her authority while documenting her responses for their entertainment. Team members had adopted roles as observers and commentators who provided real-time feedback about Emma's reactions to Kyle's provocations while building excitement for more dramatic confrontations that were clearly being planned for future encounters. Emma's recording equipment captured planning sessions where wrestling team members discussed strategies for maximizing psychological pressure while creating opportunities for Kyle to escalate his physical intimidation without triggering immediate administrative intervention. Their conversations revealed sophisticated understanding of institutional blind spots and faculty vulnerabilities that suggested extensive experience with harassment campaigns against previous targets. The casual way they discussed driving away unwanted teachers revealed a culture where such behavior was normalized and even celebrated. The expansion of Kyle's harassment campaign beyond the wrestling team had attracted students who saw participation in faculty intimidation as an opportunity to improve their social status, while engaging in exciting behavior that carried minimal risk of consequences. These recruits brought additional energy and creativity to the campaign, while providing Kyle with a larger audience for his demonstrations of power over Emma's professional environment. Their participation had transformed isolated incidents into coordinated campaigns that created sustained pressure designed to break down Emma's resistance over time. Emma's observation of recruitment tactics provided valuable insight into how harassment cultures perpetuate themselves within educational institutions, and how individual perpetrators leverage social dynamics to multiply their impact on targeted victims. Kyle's ability to attract followers revealed the appeal of participating in sanctioned aggression against authority figures while demonstrating the institutional failures that made such campaigns possible and profitable for students who understood how to exploit administrative weaknesses. The content of student discussions that Emma recorded revealed explicit goals and timelines for their harassment campaign that could serve as crucial evidence if legal intervention became necessary. Students spoke openly about their intention to drive Emma away from Riverside High School before the end of the academic year, while discussing specific strategies for escalating pressure until she either quit or suffered some form of breakdown that would eliminate her as an effective educator. Their casual planning revealed both the systematic nature of their harassment and their confidence in institutional protection from consequences. Kyle's increasing boldness had led him to begin making threats that were barely disguised as predictions about Emma's future at Riverside High School. His comments about teachers who didn't understand school culture and what happened to faculty members who couldn't adapt to student expectations carried implicit warnings about escalating consequences for continued resistance to his authority. These threats were delivered in contexts where they could be dismissed as casual observations, while making their intimidating intent clear to Emma and any students who overheard them. The progression of Kyle's behavior suggested that he was building toward a dramatic confrontation that would either establish his complete dominance over Emma or provide justification for escalating to more direct forms of assault. His systematic testing of boundaries had revealed Emma's apparent limitations, while building confidence among his supporters that more aggressive actions would be both successful and consequence-free. The approaching climax of their conflict was becoming inevitable, as Kyle's confidence reached levels that would require dramatic demonstration of his power. Emma's colleagues had begun to notice the hostile environment in her classroom, while offering advice that consistently emphasized accommodation and avoidance, rather than confrontation with students who were clearly engaging in harassment behavior. Their suggestions revealed shared understanding that certain pupils were effectively untouchable, and that faculty members who challenged protected students too aggressively would find themselves isolated and eventually forced out of their positions. The mathematics department's survival strategy involved accepting limitations on faculty authority, while focusing energy on students who demonstrated basic respect for educational boundaries. The administrative response to Emma's increasing requests for guidance about classroom management had revealed systematic policies that prioritized avoiding conflict with influential families over protecting faculty members from student harassment. Principal Hansen's advice consistently emphasized understanding student backgrounds and building positive relationships while avoiding specific interventions that might trigger complaints from parents who wielded influence within the community. His guidance revealed institutional priorities that made effective teaching impossible, while placing responsibility for harassment on faculty members who were targeted by protected students. Assistant Principal Martinez had become increasingly explicit about administrative expectations regarding faculty tolerance for student aggression, while suggesting that Emma's professional standards might be unrealistic for Riverside High School's educational environment. Her recommendation that Emma adopt more accommodating teaching methods essentially placed responsibility for student behavior on faculty's shoulders, while implying that harassment was a natural consequence of maintaining appropriate academic expectations. This guidance revealed institutional culture, where educators were expected to absorb hostility rather than challenge behaviors that undermined educational effectiveness. The most troubling aspect of administrative responses was their obvious discomfort with Emma's systematic documentation of incidents and requests for specific interventions to address harassment behavior. School officials seemed alarmed by her detailed record-keeping and formal incident reports, suggesting preferences for handling faculty concerns through informal discussions that left no paper trail of institutional failures to protect educators from student aggression. Their advice consistently emphasized relationship building over documentation, revealing desires to maintain plausible deniability about harassment that they knew was occurring but chose not to address through official channels. Kyle's behavior had attracted attention from Coach Stevens, who had begun attending Emma's classes as an observer ostensibly interested in monitoring his athlete's academic performance. Stevens' presence served multiple purposes, providing implicit support for Kyle's harassment campaign, while gathering intelligence about Emma's responses that could be used to refine future strategies. His observations also sent clear messages to other faculty members about administrative priorities and the protection that certain students enjoyed regardless of their behavior toward educators. Stevens' interactions with Emma revealed sophisticated understanding of institutional dynamics and faculty vulnerabilities that suggested extensive experience with protecting athletes from consequences while maintaining plausible deniability about his role in enabling their behavior. His questions about her teaching methods and classroom management strategies were designed to gather information that could be used against her while presenting himself as a concerned coach interested in his athletes' educational success. The subtext of their conversations made it clear that Stevens viewed Emma as a threat to his athletes' comfortable position within the school's hierarchy. The approaching December holiday break had created additional pressure for Kyle to demonstrate his dominance over Emma before the winter recess provided her with temporary relief from daily harassment. His comments about teachers who might not return after Christmas vacation carried implicit threats about escalating consequences for continued resistance to his authority, while building excitement among his supporters for dramatic confrontations that would either establish his complete control or eliminate Emma as an obstacle to their comfortable dominance of classroom environments. Emma's systematic documentation had created comprehensive evidence of harassment that extended far beyond individual student behavior problems to reveal institutional failures that enabled and protected perpetrators while silencing victims. Her recordings captured not only specific incidents of aggression, but also administrative responses that prioritized avoiding conflict over protecting faculty members from systematic intimidation campaigns. The evidence she had collected would eventually expose the culture that had contributed to Jake's death, while providing justice for his memory and protection for future victims. The security cameras that would capture Kyle's ultimate demonstration of power were already in position throughout the hallways and common areas where the final confrontation would unfold. Emma's months of careful preparation had created perfect conditions for documenting the harassment that school officials claimed they had never witnessed, while revealing the systematic nature of institutional failures that made such behavior possible and profitable for students who understood how to exploit administrative weaknesses and faculty vulnerabilities. The December afternoon air hung thick with tension as Emma finished erasing equations from the whiteboard, her classroom empty except for the lingering echoes of Kyle's parting comment about teachers who didn't know their place at Riverside High School. The final bell had rung 20 minutes ago, but Emma remained behind to organize materials for tomorrow's lessons while processing the events of a day that had pushed Kyle's harassment campaign to dangerous new levels of aggression and personal violation. Kyle's behavior during sixth period had crossed boundaries that even Emma's extensive martial arts training hadn't fully prepared her to handle while maintaining her cover as a vulnerable substitute teacher. His decision to physically grab her cane during a heated classroom discussion about quadratic equations had represented a dramatic escalation that transformed previous incidents of harassment into something approaching assault. The action had been swift and calculated, timed to occur when other students were focused on their worksheets and unlikely to witness the full extent of his aggression. The moment had unfolded with the kind of crystalline clarity that Emma remembered from her most intense sparring sessions, where time seemed to slow, and every detail became hyper-visible while adrenaline flooded her system with combat awareness. Kyle had approached her desk under the pretense of asking a question about homework assignments, his casual demeanor masking the predatory focus that Emma recognized from years of studying aggressive body language and attack patterns. When Emma had turned to retrieve her gradebook from the desk drawer, Kyle had reached out and grasped her walking cane with both hands, lifting it away from her reach while stepping back to observe her reaction. The action had left Emma momentarily off balance while Kyle held her primary mobility aid like a trophy, his expression mixing triumph with anticipation as he waited to see how she would respond to this unprecedented violation of her physical autonomy and basic dignity. Emma's response had been carefully controlled, despite the rage that burned through her nervous system like liquid fire. Her martial arts training had taught her to channel intense emotions into tactical awareness, rather than allowing them to compromise her strategic thinking, and Kyle's aggression had triggered mental processes that automatically began calculating distances, leverage points, and optimal techniques for disabling an opponent who had just committed assault against a disabled individual. Instead of revealing her true capabilities, Emma had forced herself to appear shocked and helpless, while documenting every detail of Kyle's behavior through the recording devices that captured both his actions and his expression of satisfaction at successfully humiliating her in front of witnesses. Her apparent vulnerability had encouraged Kyle to prolong the incident, while making increasingly bold statements about teachers who needed to learn respect for student authority at Riverside High School. The other students in the classroom had reacted with the kind of uncomfortable silence that suggested they understood they were witnessing something inappropriate while lacking the courage or authority to intervene on Emma's behalf. Their expressions revealed a mixture of embarrassment and fascination as they watched their mathematics teacher being physically dominated by a student who clearly viewed such behavior as entertaining rather than criminal. Kyle had eventually returned Emma's cane with an elaborate show of concern for her welfare, his apology delivered in tones that mocked genuine remorse while making it clear that he viewed her disability as a source of amusement rather than a condition deserving of respect or accommodation. His performance had been designed to humiliate Emma while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions if the incident was reported to school administrators. The aftermath of Kyle's assault had revealed the true depth of institutional dysfunction at Riverside High School as Emma processed the incident through official channels while documenting administrative responses that prioritized protecting Kyle over addressing his criminal behavior. Her formal complaint to Principal Hansen had been met with suggestions that miscommunication and teenage impulsiveness might explain Kyle's actions, while Assistant Principal Martinez had recommended mediation sessions designed to improve student-teacher relationships rather than consequences for assault. The administration's response had followed predictable patterns that Emma recognized from Jake's journal entries describing similar incidents where his harassment had been dismissed as personality conflicts or misunderstandings rather than systematic abuse that violated basic standards of human decency and institutional safety. The consistency of administrative excuses revealed a culture where certain students were effectively immune from consequences, while their victims were expected to accommodate increasingly aggressive behavior through understanding and forgiveness. Emma's documentation of these administrative failures provided crucial evidence of institutional negligence that extended far beyond individual incompetence to systematic policies that enabled student harassment while protecting perpetrators from accountability. Her recording devices captured not only the content of official responses, but also the tone and body language of administrators who were clearly uncomfortable with addressing Kyle's behavior through appropriate disciplinary channels. The wrestling team's reaction to news of Kyle's escalating aggression had been immediate and enthusiastic, with team members expressing admiration for his boldness while speculating about future opportunities to demonstrate their own power over faculty authority. Their conversations revealed sophisticated understanding of administrative blind spots and institutional protection that suggested extensive experience with harassment campaigns against vulnerable targets throughout their academic careers. Emma's hidden surveillance equipment captured planning sessions where wrestling team members discussed strategies for supporting Kyle's campaign while expanding their own harassment activities to create maximum pressure on Emma's professional effectiveness and personal safety. Their casual discussion of driving away unwanted teachers revealed a culture where such behavior was normalized and celebrated, rather than recognized as criminal activity that violated both institutional policies and federal civil rights protections. The most troubling aspect of team discussions was their explicit planning for a dramatic confrontation that would either force Emma's resignation or establish their complete dominance over her presence in the school environment. Team members spoke openly about their intention to create a public incident that would humiliate Emma, while demonstrating their collective power to other students who might consider challenging their authority or reporting their behavior to administrators. Kyle's confidence had reached levels that demanded dramatic demonstration of his power over Emma, while providing entertainment for supporters who expected increasingly bold actions from their acknowledged leader. His comments about teachers who didn't understand Riverside traditions and what happened to faculty members who couldn't adapt to student expectations carried explicit threats about escalating consequences for continued resistance to his harassment campaign. The approaching winter break had created additional urgency for Kyle to establish his dominance before the holiday recess provided Emma with temporary relief from daily intimidation and assault. His references to teachers who might not return after Christmas vacation revealed his intention to create conditions that would either force her resignation or provide justification for administrative action that would eliminate her as an obstacle to his comfortable control of classroom environments. Emma's observation of Kyle's behavior patterns had revealed sophisticated tactical thinking that suggested extensive experience with targeting vulnerable individuals while maintaining protection from institutional consequences. His approach combined psychological warfare designed to break down mental defenses with strategic physical intimidation that tested boundaries while building toward more aggressive actions that would maximize humiliation and entertainment value for his audience. The systematic nature of Kyle's harassment revealed coordination with adults who understood institutional dynamics and legal boundaries well enough to guide student behavior that pushed ethical limits while avoiding consequences that might trigger serious administrative intervention. Emma suspected that Coach Stevens was providing tactical advice about faculty vulnerabilities and administrative blind spots that made Kyle's campaign more effective while protecting him from accountability. Her investigation had uncovered evidence of similar harassment campaigns against previous faculty members who had challenged athletic program priorities or attempted to establish academic standards that conflicted with special treatment for influential students. The pattern of departures among mathematics department personnel revealed a systematic problem that extended far beyond individual personality conflicts to institutional culture that made effective teaching impossible for educators who refused to accommodate harassment and academic fraud. The approaching confrontation had taken on inevitability, as Kyle's confidence and Emma's apparent vulnerability created conditions where dramatic escalation was required to satisfy expectations that had been building among students who viewed faculty intimidation as entertainment rather than criminal behavior. Emma understood that Kyle was planning an incident that would either establish his complete dominance or provide justification for actions that would eliminate her from the school environment entirely. Her martial arts training had taught her to recognize the psychological dynamics that preceded violent confrontations, and the importance of controlling circumstances where such encounters occurred. Kyle's behavior suggested planning for a public demonstration of power that would maximize humiliation, while providing an audience large enough to ensure that news of Emma's defeat would spread throughout the school community and discourage other faculty members from challenging student authority. The security cameras positioned throughout Riverside High School would capture every detail of the confrontation that Kyle was orchestrating, while providing evidence that could finally expose the institutional failures that had enabled his harassment campaign and contributed to Jake's tragic death. Emma's months of systematic documentation had created comprehensive records that would make administrative denial impossible, while providing justice for her brother's memory and protection for future victims. Kyle's selection of the main hallway during class change as the setting for his planned confrontation revealed tactical thinking designed to maximize witnesses while minimizing the likelihood of immediate adult intervention. The location would provide the largest possible audience for Emma's humiliation, while ensuring that his demonstration of power would be witnessed by students throughout the school, who would spread news of his victory over faculty authority. The timing of Kyle's planned assault during the chaos of class change would create conditions where his actions might appear accidental or spontaneous rather than premeditated attacks designed to inflict maximum psychological damage, while entertaining supporters who expected increasingly dramatic demonstrations of his power over vulnerable targets. His strategy revealed sophisticated understanding of institutional blind spots and crowd dynamics that suggested adult guidance about optimal conditions for avoiding consequences while achieving maximum impact. Emma's preparation for the inevitable confrontation had involved not only maintaining her martial arts conditioning through discrete evening training sessions, but also ensuring that her recording equipment would capture every detail of Kyle's assault, while providing evidence that could support both criminal charges and civil rights violations. Her surveillance capabilities would document not only the physical attack, but also the institutional response that would reveal systematic failures to protect faculty members from student harassment. The approaching conflict had attracted attention from other students who sensed that something significant was building between Kyle and Emma, while lacking understanding of the true dynamics underlying their increasingly tense interactions. Their speculation and excitement revealed the entertainment value that student audiences derive from faculty harassment while demonstrating the normalization of such behavior within Riverside High School's toxic culture. Kyle's recruitment of additional supporters for his planned confrontation had expanded beyond the wrestling team to include students who viewed participation in faculty intimidation as an opportunity to improve their social status while engaging in exciting behavior that carried minimal risk of institutional consequences. Their enthusiasm for witnessing Emma's humiliation revealed the depth of cultural dysfunction that made systematic harassment possible, while creating audiences that encouraged perpetrators to escalate their aggression. The most dangerous aspect of Kyle's escalating campaign was his increasing focus on Emma's walking cane as a target for humiliation that would provide maximum entertainment value, while highlighting her physical vulnerability to an audience of impressionable students. His comments about teachers who relied on special equipment and what happened to faculty members who couldn't handle normal school environments carried explicit threats about his intentions to use her disability as a source of public humiliation. Emma understood that Kyle's fixation on her mobility aid represented the culmination of months of testing and planning that were building toward a dramatic assault designed to maximize her degradation while demonstrating his power over her most basic physical needs. His behavior suggested coordination with supporters who would ensure that the incident was recorded and distributed throughout the school community as evidence of his dominance over faculty authority. The institutional response to Emma's increasing requests for protection and intervention had revealed systematic policies that prioritized avoiding conflict with influential families over ensuring faculty safety and basic human dignity. Administrative guidance consistently emphasized accommodation and understanding rather than consequences for students whose behavior clearly violated both school policies and criminal statutes governing assault and harassment. Principal Hanson's advice during their most recent meeting had been explicit about institutional expectations regarding faculty tolerance for student aggression, while suggesting that Emma's professional standards and disability accommodations might be creating unnecessary friction with students who were accustomed to more flexible educational environments. His recommendation that she consider alternative career paths essentially placed responsibility for Kyle's criminal behavior on Emma's shoulders, while implying that harassment was a natural consequence of her presence in the school. The approaching winter assembly provided Kyle with the perfect opportunity to execute his planned assault against Emma in front of the largest possible audience, while ensuring maximum humiliation and entertainment value for supporters who expected dramatic demonstration of his power over faculty authority. The event would gather the entire school community in one location where his actions would be witnessed by hundreds of students, while creating conditions that would make immediate intervention difficult for any adults who might object to his behavior. Emma's recognition of the assembly as Kyle's chosen venue for confrontation had allowed her to ensure that her surveillance equipment would capture every detail of his assault, while providing evidence that could finally expose the institutional failures that had enabled systematic harassment throughout his academic career. Her preparation had created perfect conditions for documenting both the attack and the administrative response, that would reveal the depth of cultural dysfunction at Riverside High School. The security cameras positioned throughout the gymnasium would record Kyle's assault from multiple angles while capturing the reactions of students and faculty members who would witness his attack on a disabled educator. The comprehensive documentation would make administrative denial impossible, while providing evidence that could support both criminal prosecution and federal civil rights enforcement against the institutional culture that had enabled such behavior. Kyle's final comments to Emma, as students filed out of her classroom, had carried explicit threats about what would happen to teachers who didn't understand their place at Riverside High School, while building anticipation for the confrontation that would either establish his complete dominance or eliminate her as an obstacle to his comfortable control of academic environments. His confidence suggested certainty that the approaching assembly would provide him with the perfect opportunity to demonstrate his power while entertaining supporters who expected increasingly dramatic acts of faculty intimidation. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test whether Emma's months of preparation and systematic evidence collection had created the foundation for finally achieving justice for Jake's memory, while protecting future students and faculty from the harassment culture that had thrived unchallenged at Riverside High School for years. Kyle's planning and Emma's readiness would collide in a moment that would determine whether institutional dysfunction would continue or finally face the accountability that systematic harassment demanded. The winter assembly buzzing with anticipation as 400 students packed into Riverside High School's gymnasium, their voices creating a din that masked the tension radiating from the small group of wrestling team members who had positioned themselves strategically near the faculty section. Emma entered the gym using her walking cane with deliberate care, her movements appearing slightly more labored than usual as she maintained the persona of vulnerability that had encouraged Kyle's escalating aggression throughout the semester. Kyle Martinez stood with his teammates near the bleacher entrance, his posture radiating the confidence of someone who believed he was about to deliver a performance that would cement his reputation as the unchallenged alpha of Riverside High School's social hierarchy. His eyes tracked Emma's progress across the gymnasium floor with the focused intensity of a predator watching wounded prey, and the satisfied smirk on his face revealed his certainty that the next few minutes would provide the dramatic climax to months of systematic harassment. The gymnasium's security cameras captured every angle of the scene as students settled into their seats, while faculty members took their designated positions along the walls. Emma positioned herself near the center of the faculty section, her walking cane resting against the wall behind her as she maintained the careful balance required by her mobility needs. Her discrete recording devices were active and transmitting real-time footage to secure servers that would preserve evidence regardless of what happened to the equipment during the approaching confrontation. Principal Hansen took the microphone to begin the assembly with announcements about winter sports achievements and holiday break schedules, but the energy in the gymnasium suggested that many students were anticipating something more dramatic than routine administrative updates. Kyle's supporters had spread throughout the crowd with the coordination of people following a predetermined plan, their positioning ensuring maximum visibility for whatever demonstration Kyle had orchestrated. Emma's martial arts training had taught her to recognize the psychological dynamics that preceded group violence, and the atmosphere in the gymnasium carried the same electric tension she remembered from tournament competitions where multiple opponents tested each other before launching coordinated attacks. Kyle's behavior suggested that he viewed the assembly as his arena for delivering a performance that would establish his dominance while entertaining an audience that expected increasingly bold demonstrations of his power over faculty authority. The moment Kyle had been building toward arrived during the principal's discussion of academic excellence awards, when he stood up from his position in the bleachers and called out in a voice loud enough to be heard throughout the gymnasium. "Excuse me, Principal Hansen, but I think we need to address something that's been bothering a lot of students this semester." His interruption carried the false concern that had characterized all his previous harassment while creating a platform for the public humiliation he had been planning. Hansen's response revealed the institutional dysfunction that had enabled Kyle's harassment campaign as he actually paused his presentation to acknowledge the interruption rather than maintaining appropriate boundaries between student and administrative authority. "What's your concern, Kyle?" the principal asked, his tone suggesting familiarity with Kyle's family influence and willingness to accommodate behavior that would be unacceptable from less privileged students. Kyle's answer was delivered with theatrical concern that masked his predatory intentions while building suspense for the audience that was beginning to understand they were witnessing something beyond routine assembly proceedings. "Well, sir, I think we need to talk about teachers who aren't really qualified to be here, especially ones who can't handle the basic requirements of classroom management because of their personal problems." The comment sent ripples of excitement through the student body as they realized Kyle was publicly challenging a faculty member, while Principal Hansen seemed uncertain about how to respond to such unprecedented behavior during a school assembly. Emma remained motionless against the wall, her expression neutral despite the adrenaline flooding her system as Kyle's planned assault moved into its opening phase. Kyle continued his performance with the confidence of someone who had never faced meaningful consequences for inappropriate behavior. I mean, how are students supposed to respect teachers who can't even walk normally or handle basic classroom activities without special equipment? His words were designed to maximize humiliation while maintaining enough ambiguity to allow administrative denial about their obviously discriminatory intent. The gymnasium fell into uncomfortable silence as students processed Kyle's public attack on a disabled faculty member, while faculty members exchanged nervous glances but made no move to intervene on Emma's behalf. Their inaction revealed the depth of institutional conditioning that had taught educators to avoid confrontation with protected students regardless of the appropriateness of their behavior. Emma's response surprised everyone in the gymnasium as she stepped away from the wall and spoke in a clear voice that carried easily through the sudden quiet. "Kyle, I appreciate your concern about classroom management, and I think this might be a good opportunity to demonstrate some of the techniques I use to handle challenging situations." Her words were delivered with professional calm that suggested confidence rather than the defensiveness Kyle had expected. Kyle's expression shifted from satisfaction to confusion as Emma's response failed to match the script he had anticipated. His plan had assumed that public humiliation would trigger emotional breakdown or defensive reactions that would justify escalating his attack while entertaining his supporters. Emma's composed demeanor suggested that she might be more formidable than his months of testing had revealed. The wrestling team members positioned throughout the gymnasium began moving closer to the confrontation zone, their coordination suggesting rehearsed plans for supporting Kyle's demonstration while ensuring that any faculty intervention would be blocked or discouraged. Their positioning revealed sophisticated tactical thinking about crowd control and escape routes that indicated adult guidance about optimal conditions for avoiding consequences while maximizing impact. Kyle recovered his composure quickly and decided to escalate his attack to the physical demonstration he had been planning throughout the semester. "You know what, Miss Walsh? I think you need to learn what it means to be part of the Riverside family. And maybe it's time someone taught you about our traditions." His words carried the same threatening undertones that had preceded his previous assaults, while building anticipation among supporters who expected increasingly dramatic acts of faculty intimidation. Emma remained calm as Kyle approached her position near the faculty section, her martial arts training automatically calculating distances and angles, while her recording equipment captured every detail of his aggressive advance. "Kyle, I think you should return to your seat so we can continue the assembly without further disruption," she said professionally, her tone remaining steady despite the obvious threat his approach represented. Kyle's response revealed the culmination of months of planning as he reached for Emma's walking cane with both hands, intending to repeat his previous humiliation on a much larger scale. "I think you need to learn some respect," he declared as his fingers closed around the polished wood, his grip firm with the confidence of someone who believed he was about to deliver the performance that would cement his reputation throughout the school. What happened next unfolded with stunning speed as Emma's hidden capabilities finally revealed themselves to an audience that had never imagined their apparently vulnerable mathematics teacher possessed any ability to defend herself against aggressive students. The moment Kyle's hands made contact with her walking cane, Emma's body exploded into motion with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years training for exactly this type of confrontation. Emma's left hand snapped forward to grip Kyle's wrist with crushing force, while her right hand maintained control of her cane as she pivoted on her supporting leg with perfect balance. The movement was so fast that most observers initially failed to understand what was happening as Kyle found himself suddenly locked in a joint manipulation that sent waves of pain shooting through his arm and shoulder. Kyle's confident expression transformed into shock and then agony as Emma applied pressure that brought him to his knees while maintaining complete control over his movement and position. His attempts to pull away only increased the pain as Emma's grip tightened with the precision of someone who understood exactly how much pressure was required to control an opponent without causing permanent injury. The gymnasium erupted into chaos as 400 students processed the impossible sight of their intimidating wrestling star being dominated by a disabled teacher who was demonstrating combat skills that none of them had imagined possible. Kyle's supporters stood frozen in disbelief while other students began recording the confrontation with their phones, capturing evidence that would soon spread far beyond Riverside High School. Emma's voice cut through the pandemonium with calm authority as she maintained her grip on Kyle's wrist while addressing the shocked audience. "Kyle, you've just committed assault against a disabled individual in front of 400 witnesses while being recorded by multiple security cameras. You're going to remain exactly where you are until law enforcement arrives to place you under arrest." Kyle's attempts to escape Emma's control only resulted in additional pain as she adjusted her grip to maintain perfect leverage while demonstrating techniques that revealed years of advanced martial arts training. His humiliation was complete, as the student who had terrorized faculty and students throughout his academic career found himself helpless against someone he had targeted for harassment because of her apparent vulnerability. The wrestling team members who had positioned themselves to support Kyle's demonstration found themselves uncertain about how to respond to a situation that had developed far outside their expectations. Their leader was clearly being dominated by techniques they didn't understand, and Emma's calm competence suggested that any attempt to intervene would likely result in additional humiliation for Kyle's supporters. Principal Hansen's response revealed the depth of his institutional incompetence as he called for everyone to remain calm, while making no immediate move to contact law enforcement about the assault that had just occurred in front of hundreds of witnesses. His hesitation suggested uncertainty about how to handle a situation where the protected student had clearly committed crimes, while the apparent victim was demonstrating capabilities that challenged every assumption about the incident. Emma maintained her control over Kyle while addressing the shocked administrator directly. "Principal Hansen, I need you to contact law enforcement immediately to report an assault that has been captured by your security cameras. Kyle has just committed a hate crime against a disabled individual, and this incident represents the culmination of months of systematic harassment that your administration has chosen to ignore, despite documented complaints." The revelation that Emma had been documenting Kyle's behavior sent additional shockwaves through the watching crowd, as students and faculty began to understand that the apparent victim had been systematically gathering evidence about harassment that many of them had witnessed but chosen to ignore. Emma's professional demeanor suggested preparation and planning that went far beyond defensive reactions to unexpected assault. Kyle's struggles grew weaker as the pain in his wrist and shoulder convinced him that resistance would only increase his suffering while providing additional entertainment for an audience that was recording his complete humiliation. His arrogant confidence had evaporated entirely as he found himself at the mercy of someone whose abilities he had completely misjudged through months of systematic harassment. Emma's explanation continued as she maintained perfect control over her attacker, while educating the audience about the legal implications of what they had just witnessed. What Kyle doesn't understand is that assault against disabled individuals carries enhanced penalties under both state and federal law, and his behavior has been systematically documented throughout this semester as part of an investigation into harassment culture at this institution. The mention of federal investigation sent visible shock through Principal Hansen and the faculty members who realized that their institutional failures were about to face scrutiny from authorities with the power to impose consequences that local politics couldn't influence or dismiss. Emma's calm revelation suggested preparation and connections that went far beyond anything they had anticipated from a substitute mathematics teacher. Kyle's voice cracked as he attempted to minimize his actions while remaining trapped in Emma's painful grip. "I was just joking around. This is all a misunderstanding. She's overreacting to normal student behavior." His protests revealed the same dismissive attitude that had characterized his previous harassment while demonstrating his failure to understand the serious legal consequences of his actions. Emma's response was delivered with the authority of someone who understood both the legal and practical implications of Kyle's behavior. "Kyle, there's nothing normal about systematically harassing disabled individuals, and there's nothing ambiguous about assault. Your months of harassment have been recorded and documented according to legal standards, and your attack today has provided the final evidence needed for serious criminal charges." The arrival of law enforcement officers who had been summoned by security personnel finally broke the spell that had held the gymnasium audience transfixed by Emma's demonstration of hidden capabilities. The officer's professional assessment of the situation revealed immediate understanding that they were dealing with a clear case of assault against a disabled victim rather than the mutual altercation that Kyle's supporters might have expected. Emma released her grip on Kyle's wrist as the officers took control of the situation, her movement fluid and controlled as she stepped back, while maintaining perfect balance despite the stress of the confrontation. Her demonstration had revealed not only her martial arts capabilities, but also her tactical intelligence and emotional control under extreme pressure. Kyle's arrest proceeded with swift efficiency as the officers processed the overwhelming evidence of assault that had been witnessed by hundreds of people while being recorded by multiple security cameras. His rights were read in front of the same audience that had watched his humiliation, transforming his intended demonstration of power into a very public consequence for months of criminal behavior. The gymnasium slowly emptied as students processed what they had witnessed, while faculty members struggled to understand how their assumptions about both Kyle and Emma had proven so completely wrong. The incident had revealed institutional failures that could no longer be ignored, while demonstrating that apparent vulnerability could mask formidable capabilities that would emerge when necessary. Emma's brief statement to the assembled crowd before departing with law enforcement revealed the broader purpose behind her presence at Riverside High School. Kyle's behavior represents a pattern of harassment that has been enabled by institutional failures throughout this school district. Today's incident provides the evidence needed to ensure that systematic changes protect future students and faculty from the culture that made such behavior possible. The investigation that followed Emma's revelation exposed years of institutional cover-ups and administrative negligence that had enabled harassment culture to flourish while silencing victims who lacked the resources or connections to fight back effectively. Kyle's arrest became the catalyst for comprehensive reforms that transformed Riverside High School's culture, while providing justice for Jake's memory and protection for vulnerable individuals who deserve safe educational environments. Kyle's prosecution proceeded swiftly with overwhelming evidence that included months of documented harassment, plus the dramatic assault captured by security cameras and witnessed by hundreds of people. His conviction on multiple charges, including disability-based hate crimes, resulted in serious consequences that sent clear messages about institutional accountability and legal protections for vulnerable populations. Coach Stevens faced his own investigation as authorities examined his role in enabling and protecting Kyle's harassment campaign while fostering the athletic culture that had prioritized sports success over basic human decency and institutional safety. His dismissal marked the beginning of comprehensive changes that would prevent future coaches from creating environments where harassment was normalized and celebrated. Principal Hansen's resignation came amid federal oversight that revealed systematic failures to protect faculty and students from harassment, while maintaining policies that enabled privileged students to avoid consequences for criminal behavior. His replacement implemented new procedures that ensured complaints would be investigated properly rather than dismissed to protect institutional reputation and influential families. Emma's investigation had achieved justice for Jake's memory while creating lasting changes that would protect future generations of students and faculty from the harassment culture that had thrived unchallenged for years. Her courage in facing personal danger while maintaining professional composure had exposed institutional failures that federal authorities could no longer ignore or dismiss. The video footage of Kyle's humiliation spread rapidly through social media platforms, becoming a viral sensation that sparked national conversations about bullying culture and the importance of protecting vulnerable individuals from systematic harassment. Emma's demonstration that apparent weakness could mask formidable strength inspired countless others to stand up against harassment while seeking justice for their own experiences with institutional failure. Emma returned to her career in social work with the satisfaction of knowing that her brother's death had ultimately led to meaningful changes that would prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. Her brief time at Riverside High School had achieved more lasting reform than years of traditional advocacy, while demonstrating the power of preparation, documentation, and courage in the face of seemingly insurmountable institutional corruption. Kyle's time in juvenile detention provided him with opportunities to reflect on the consequences of his entitled behavior while participating in programs designed to address the attitudes and beliefs that had led to his criminal actions. His experience served as a cautionary tale for other privileged students who might consider harassment as entertainment rather than recognizing the serious legal and personal consequences of such behavior. The reforms implemented at Riverside High School created new reporting systems and protection policies that ensured future complaints would be investigated by trained professionals rather than dismissed by administrators who prioritized institutional reputation over individual safety. Emma's documentation had provided a blueprint for recognizing and addressing harassment culture that was adopted by school districts throughout the region. Years later, Emma would receive letters from students whose lives had been changed by her courage in exposing the harassment culture that had made their educational experience traumatic and dangerous. Their gratitude reminded her that institutional change was possible when individuals were willing to face personal risk for the sake of protecting vulnerable populations from systematic abuse and administrative indifference. The walking cane that Kyle had tried to use as a symbol of weakness became a reminder of the strength that could emerge from apparent vulnerability when backed by preparation, training, and unwavering commitment to justice. Emma's demonstration had proven that bullies who targeted disabled individuals based on assumptions about helplessness might discover too late that their victims possessed capabilities that exceeded their ability to handle the consequences of their aggressive behavior. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.